My background is mostly in computer science. I studied at RUMS in Lahore and then did a PhD in computer science at Princeton University. And Princeton Computer Science Department is where the project really started. We were actually focusing on building next generation secure internet infrastructure and almost like discovered blockchains and cryptocurrencies as a solution for some of the problems that we were trying to solve. So I think at a very high level, the way to think about this is that the internet was originally designed as a open network, open meaning that anyone can come online and use the internet, and decentralized in the sense that you're not dependent on any single company. The internet is kind of like self-organizing and many different people and entities kind of like participating. There's no company that has monopoly control over it. But that situation has unfortunately changed over the last couple of decades, where there are a couple of the big tech monopolies that have formed, and people are increasingly dependent on those handful of companies to be able to use basic internet services. And I think the work that we're doing is effectively how to reset that clock, how to give power back to the people, how to make sure that the open, decentralized nature of the internet is preserved, not just kind of like through policy changes or anything like that, but by building a fundamentally unique type of a network where there are mathematical proofs for why something is decentralized or secure, and the control kind of like goes back to the people. So that's the work that we've been doing, and cryptocurrencies and blockchains really fit in really nicely with this platform, because that's fundamentally what Bitcoin is about. Because Bitcoin is not a bank, right? It is not a company. It is a decentralized movement. It's a decentralized network where people can basically take control of their own assets, their own finances, their own destiny in a way, and they're not dependent on large institutions, banks, or governments who can kind of like issue new currency to kind of like devalue your existing holdings, or basically have all sorts of restrictions over what you can and cannot do with basically your assets. And Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are kind of like a reaction to that. The way to think about this is that, yes, there's some technology behind it, but it's actually closer to how you would expect real world to work. Like imagine that every, typical citizen or user of the internet, even in Pakistan, realizes how property rights work, right? Like if you want to buy a piece of lot, you really want to make sure it's yours, right? Like, and you want to make sure that you actually own it. Or if you buy a car, you want to make sure that it's registered in your name and you actually physically own the car. Like it's not like you're not going to just assume if you don't have the car that you have it, right? So similarly, these are property rights online, which were never there before. So if you're saying that you own a username, or you own your data, or you own some cryptocurrency, like do you really own it? Right? Because there were no property rights before, and it is introducing that concept of those rights and actually having mathematical guarantees. Just like there is some. If you own something and it's in your house, like you physically know that this is in your house, like we give people the equivalent of that online, where you can have your own kind of like a private space online, and you can own digital assets, you can own currencies, and there's no company in the middle, right? So you mathematically actually own a piece of the internet, so to speak. And I think that's a very revolutionary concept. But then at the same time, another way to think about this is that a lot of how banking systems work, or even large tech companies work, is almost like a black box to it, right? And those rules can change whenever these large players decide that these rules are going to change. I think WhatsApp is a great example. Recently, there was a big movement where WhatsApp was changing their privacy policy, and people started kind of like downloading other types of applications like Signal and so on. So this is the exact problem that this technology solves. What it does is it actually makes the rules of the system transparent to everyone who is in the system, and it also guarantees that no one can change the rules, right? So everyone, it's basically about leveling the playing field so that everyone knows what the rules are and no one has the power to change the rules once they have been set. And that's how people should think about these things. There have been some good signs from Pakistan that I've noticed, and there have been some like hesitation from regulators as well. Like for example, there was some great news coming from KP, where the KP government just went ahead and legalized mining and cryptocurrency and so on, which is great to see. But at the same time, like it seems like the government or certain banks or the state bank, they're afraid of Bitcoin being used for basically purposes that they don't approve of, or it being used as a way of capital outflow from the country. And I understand their concerns, but they're actually very, very easy to address. Like you don't want to miss out on the biggest revolution since the invention of the internet, because you had some concerns about certain aspects of that technology, right? Like I think this is much bigger than all of us. So my message to the regulators would be that think of this as not having a cryptocurrency exchange in the country is equivalent to not having an internet connection or a electricity connection in the country. Like you are cutting yourself off from the global markets, and the global markets are basically moving towards crypto. It's to give you an idea, a couple of years ago, so I started in this industry in 2013 or so. At that time, the total industry was around a couple of $1 billion. Recently, the industry crossed $1 trillion in market cap, and it is still early days. Right? So this is growing faster than we need. And again, like imagine now people understand, like if somebody comes and says, hey, we are going to cut off your internet access for the entire country and no one can be online. People will be like, that's ridiculous. Like how would we even live? And it would be such a bad thing from an economic perspective for the country to completely be cut off from the rest of the world. But that is the equivalent of what's literally happening with crypto. You are not connecting your country to the crypto networks. And that is not a way to move forward. In fact, there's a lot of opportunity here to actually show leadership and to embrace these technologies faster than other places. China, for example, is already working on their own digital cryptocurrency. Like basically, imagine that instead of issuing paper money, you can do that in a more efficient way on a blockchain. And these things can trade, and they're easier to kind of transfer with lower fees and so on. So in a way, like I know that digitization is a big topic in Pakistan. People understand the benefits of it. This is effectively digitization to a next level. Like you're not upgrading your systems to a 20, 30-year-old technology of databases or something. You're actually directly jumping to the crypto networks, which are the future and which are way more efficient, way more powerful, and they connect you to the global crypto economy, which is growing like anything. The way to think about this is the strongest argument is probably an economic one, that the government is going to hurt themselves from an economic perspective, and they're going to hurt the country. Right? Like if you ban, a chat app, like maybe the economic impact of that is not that clear, right? But over here, the economic impact is extremely clear, because if you would have embraced these technologies 2 years ago, and let's say people were able to build up their reserves for Bitcoin or some of these other technologies, you would have been getting much better rates because you were early adopters, and you would actually be seeing returns right now, or the amount of economic activity that could have been generated, because you can do an analysis on, pick a country and pick a exchange there. They would be doing like, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars of trading, but because Pakistan does not have an exchange, it is not part of that global economy. It's a little bit like saying that, hey, shut down the Karachi Stock Exchange. right? And people's head would spin that, hey, why would you shut down the Karachi Stock Exchange? Because that would be very bad for the economy of the country. It's a similar situation. By not letting the crypto assets trade, you are losing money, right? Money that could have gone to people in the country, and it would have connected them to the rest of the world. And in terms of like what we're doing, so we've actually, first of all, like Stacks is effectively a blockchain that extends the functionality of Bitcoin. So it's built kind of like on Bitcoin, and it brings applications and smart contracts to it. Bitcoin is great, but it doesn't have smart contracts. Smart contracts are these programs that people can write for writing all sorts of kind of like, next generation decentralized finance applications or decentralized apps like a more secure WhatsApp and so on. So we enable that functionality. And so the cryptocurrency was released through a SEC qualified offering, meaning that regulators in the US explicitly qualified the asset, meaning that they were fine with the distribution of this asset. And that was the first time in history that happened, even in the US. So I think that could actually be a great example for Pakistan that, look, this cryptocurrency was qualified by the regulators like the SEC that regulate Wall Street in the US. So we can sit down and talk about what problems do you have with this cryptocurrency if the US regulators are fine. So that's kind of like one point. And then I would say that any concerns around the lack of kind of money laundering abilities or other types of like capital outflow type of problems, they are trivial to solve, right? Like they're absolutely trivial to solve if you have a regulated exchange in the country that does KYC, that basically you can put any sorts of restrictions there, because people just want to get exposure to Bitcoin and they want to trade, right? You can actually restrict like how transfers or other types of activities might happen, and that'll be fine, at least in the initial days, until there's more education and people realize that there's many other things that can be. Technology is almost like rewriting the world's financial information. Right? So instead of having these large banks that might develop a financial product and then introduce that to their customers, developers are able to just build these things in a more open way, much faster, and they can deploy these products on blockchains, and then liquidity kind of like moves into these products, right? But let's take an example of a lending product. That imagine that instead of going to a bank and taking a loan, it's now possible to take loans from computer software. And these computer software programs are like smart contracts. And it's not that it sounds like a crazy idea, but there are billions of dollars of these loans that are already being issued, like here in the US or in other Western countries. Also Asia, like Asia is actually a much bigger market for cryptocurrency. So this is like basically saying that if it was early stages of either the internet, if you think about Silicon Valley, or early stages of Wall Street, like Wall Street was just getting started, and other countries, they wanted to have similar type of innovation, similar type of kind of like markets being created in their local jurisdictions. Like it's almost like a no-brainer that you want to do that with the cryptocurrencies, because that's where the future is heading. Right? Like there's no point in actually trying to recreate systems that are already on their way out. Right? It's a little bit like Pakistan directly jumped to cell phone usage. We never really got landlines. We never really got like dial-up internet for the rest of it. That's fine. We just skipped that phase, right? And now everyone has cell phones. So it's a little bit like you want to jump onto the crypto networks side of the global markets, because they are actually growing faster, like not just like 10x faster, like 100x faster than anything else that we've seen. I think we have, right? So Pakistan is not the only country. There are multiple. The project historically started here in the US, and then we started focusing a lot on Asia, given Asia is by far, in some ways, like maybe even a bigger market than the US. So we did a bunch of work in Asia. We have many independent entities now in our ecosystem, and 3 of the entities are actually now based out of Hong Kong. Right? So Hong Kong is actually a pretty big center for the work that we're doing. And then there are different like community-driven hotspots around the world. And interestingly, we can't predict in which country the technology kind of takes off more, but surprisingly, it's been like Turkey, South Korea, Egypt, some Latin American countries and so on, where they're very like enthusiastic grassroots community members who are trying to push this forward. And obviously with Pakistan, like I have a connection. I grew up there, did my undergrad at LUMS, and I am a big believer in the engineering talent and the entrepreneurs in the country, like who want, like I think they sometimes lack direction and they don't know what are the right things to be working on. But if someone can show them the right path, like they're extremely hardworking, extremely intelligent, and they can actually make a huge dent. So there was already kind of like interesting independent things happening in the country. Like for example, there are certain software companies in Pakistan that have been working on the technology independently. There's some research work that is now being done in some universities, and then we are seeing a bunch of grassroots movement as well. So we combined all of that into a local chapter, the SAC chapter for the country, to almost like, because this is a decentralized technology, like my company doesn't own the chapter or run it. It's more like a venue for self-organization, so that the different activities, like if some startup is working on an app or some researcher is trying to write a research paper about it, it's a venue for all of them to kind of come together, along with potentially people who are just interested in the trading aspects, or it's a free world. Like whatever someone wants to do on the network, like they can, and it's more like people can talk to each other, and they can self-organize and learn about the technology. I would say the best way to learn is the website, stacks.co. And then I'm pretty active on Twitter. My Twitter handle is my first name @Muneeb, MUNEEB. And then we are in the process of actually developing more resources, almost like one-on-one type courses, like where someone can just take a very simple course online. Either it's like general education, or they want to learn how to program smart contracts. So a very basic course where they can actually go through tutorials for how to program a smart contract and then publish it on the blockchain, what kind of things are possible. So I do think, and again, like I think one interesting thing about this project is like there's not a single company. It's not like Facebook is entering a country. Like it's a organization of open source developers and different companies who are kind of like coming together to work towards a open source technology, right? So anyone can be a part of this community, right? Like this, it's not like you get a job at a company. Like it's an open source project that anyone can be a part of. I'll just re-emphasize my main message that people who are listening to this, they should try to visualize that what if you could go back to like 1997 or 1998 and do a internet startup. Now imagine the kind of opportunity that would have been to do an internet startup in 1998. It's probably a 10x bigger opportunity to do a crypto startup today in 2020. Right? So I think that's something that any entrepreneurs or engineers in the country that are thinking of like what they should be working on should keep in mind, and then start their learning journey. There's a lot to learn when it comes to the crypto industry, but you have to start somewhere. And I think there isn't a better time to do that.